and thanks everybody for your testimony and your observations in here. And I think a lot of probably my questions are going to be answered there, but just observations. And the main observation is two kind of pronged: is the lack of consultation between yourselves, parents groups, advocacy groups, quite extraordinary, really. And I think you'll probably kind of agree with me there. The assessments of needs, I think anybody in this room and anybody that knows that process, it is failing our children. It is failing when some child has to wait over 2 years for an assessment, and when they get that assessment, they still haven't got the occupational therapist, the speech, language and so forth. It's unforgivable, I'll be honest with you, it's unforgivable. And what it seems to me, I want to get your view on it, that this new process, the standard operating procedure, is to circumvent the assessments of needs and the Disability Act to basically cut down waiting lists. So I don't know if, because that's where it seems to be, when you kind of cut it down, that this is a process to make things look better when they're not, and that's where it comes down. This obviously, it's obviously political decisions from the health service and so forth. Just the other issue is, which people have kind of touched on, is the early assessment and early intervention. I mean, as professionals, you know that is absolutely key when you have a child or a parent coming to you to say, look, I think my child has certain needs. If them needs are not met in certain times, then that child, will lose out. That's obvious. It's very, very obvious. And under the Disability Act, at this present time, the government are actually breaking their own legislation and own law. And at the moment, there's 6 individuals in the High Court against the government. So you can see how, in a juxtaposition, that the state is actually breaking their own legislation, which they can't, I suppose, give the children of this country. And just the last thing on the private, where individuals have to go to the private sector to see occupational therapists. Very, very expensive, and probably out of reach out of most people, but they're forced into that. Like I know individuals and families that have gone to see in the private sector. They're very, very good professionals, but they cannot afford to sustain that on an economic level. But yet the public service that is supposed to be a service for children, and it just can't deliver that service. So something is dramatically wrong. And you look at all the services across the country, there's a dysfunction in the service where it does not give that children them needs. So I think my main question is your view that this new procedure, standard operation procedure, is a way of actually cutting waiting lists for children in this country?
If I could just briefly touch on Deputy Kenny's question.
Ms. Long.
So, I suppose we can't speak to the motivation of the HSE. The HSE's stated position is that they are attempting to improve service and access to intervention by this change in policy. However, the effect of it is to mean that the legal rights of children to an assessment of need will be fulfilled in a 90-minute assessment according to the standard operating procedure. So the effect is that the legal rights will be met by this assessment, which we are saying is not adequate. Children will then be placed on waiting lists for further assessment, and the SOP states that a need for assessment can be an outcome of an assessment of need. The problem is in areas that are currently under-resourced, that will leave children waiting on waiting lists, potentially very long waiting lists, to access that full diagnostic assessment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Long. And Ms. Lennon?
Thank you. I'd just like to reply with 2 points, one to Deputy Kenny and one to Deputy Louise O'Reilly. Deputy Kenny posed the question, has the new SOP been generated to circumvent the AON Disability Act or water down the legal responsibility. Looking at the timeline, court cases the High Court gave permission to proceed in July 2017 for challenge on the assessment of need, failure to carry out or to finish on time. So that was in July 2017. HSE announced by press release on the 16th of August 2017 they were doing an ASD review. In correspondence to me, the team that I believe were tasked with generating the new SOP mentions that they used the autism review submissions to generate the SOP as well. For Deputy Kenny, is the new SOP being used? We have been informed that it has been deferred. I just very quickly lifted all of these. There is 30 last night comments. I will just read one or two into the record if you don't mind. And these are all current within the last couple of weeks since it was deferred. Hi, I just want to let you know that the assessment officer sent me a letter to state that she was withdrawing my son from the AON facility. I wrote to her via email explaining why this was unacceptable, and she said that because of a legal case, they are now doing away with the assessment of need. I wrote to her repeatedly. I did the form with her over the phone. Apparently, she was asked to complete a new form. Thinking I was finally getting somewhere, and got speech and language who recommended a psychological assessment. I brought my daughter previously to, and it still upsets me, and she mentions the service, and it still upsets me the way we were treated. My dad had just died, but they told me before any assessment like the ADOS took place that my daughter wasn't autistic. I have had her assessed privately, and she is classically autistic, is what she was told. Anyway, they determined this child, without carrying out an assessment of need in the HSE, that she didn't have ASD, but gave no explanation for her behaviours other than poor parenting. So there's no way I'm letting this happen to my second child. I'd love to have OT intervention, physio, etc., if it actually exists. I just wonder how many families have they done this to, how many people just accept it, and why doesn't our government actually care about its little people? I know that I'm lucky, we're working and have made lots of sacrifices so we can go privately when we have to. I do not understand why everything is such a battle. And I'll just read one more comment. I was one of the parents that was contacted by telephone by an assessment of need officer and told that I needed to go through the new form over the telephone. I feel so cheated now. What do? I applied for an assessment of need before Christmas 17 and it was officially to start on February 10th. I'm conscious that you have time constraints, but we have hundreds of the same.
Thank you very much.